So Sony has announced the new A9 II, and there are some pretty big upgrades to this new camera from the first A9 that was released 2 years ago now.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's kind of more of a polished A9. So you're basically taking everything that you loved about the A9, improving on some of the things that you possibly didn't. But I do think that if you're someone who loved the A9, you're going to love the A9 II. And if you're someone who probably didn't, I don't think this is really going to change that all that much.
Yeah, I mean, there are some big upgrades, so let's jump into it as well. If you have any questions or comments, throw them down there, and we will be down there answering them for you. We do care about what you guys have to say, so let's jump into it. So the body now has been upgraded to what the A7R4 grip is, which I love. I know we disagree on this, on ergonomics for Sony cameras, but I happen to love it now, and I think it's great. I think they actually listened to what people were saying about it, and they just did some massive improvements now to the A9 II. We do have new buttons, we have weather sealing, and it's actually very noticeable.
So to me, I'd say that yes, these are welcome upgrades. You absolutely do notice them. But I still think that when it comes to ergonomics and handling, Sony is kind of trailing the pack. Again, you will notice them. I'm not saying that you don't, but there are a couple things that are just less comfortable and more annoying about some of the button placement and things like that. They're harder to reach some of the dials than some other cameras out there.
I mean, I know it's hard to believe that a married couple disagrees on this, but we absolutely disagree on this. Sony is my top competitor for ergonomics, and I love it. I enjoy it. I love shooting with it.
So you do have tons of customization, which is great. So you can kind of configure the camera to be exactly what you want, and that's always good.
Yeah, absolutely. Sony is great with that. I think that they are the leading competitor in that, especially because all of the buttons, I mean, super customizable. You're able to do what you need, especially as a wedding photographer. That's so nice that I can just customize my camera to what I actually need.
Yeah. So you do have some hardware upgrades here. We do have UHS 2 in both slots now, which is great. We'll talk about that a little bit more and what that means for you. You also have things like Gigabit Ethernet. You have dual band Wi-Fi now and USB 3.2. So they're kind of upgrading a lot of those ports to 2019 specs, which is good.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Okay, so let's go into shooting. So we do have the same thing as the A9, the original A9. We have 20 frames per second, which is an incredible feat for any camera. I think this is awesome for any wildlife shooter, for any sports photographer, and they are the leading competitor in this as well. Now, it is the same from the original A9, so no massive upgrade. I think it's great technology, though.
Right, so you're using electronic shutter in order to do that. Mechanical shutter is going to be different. Now, normally you wouldn't want to shoot electronic shutter because you can get things like banding, and you can get rolling shutter and motion and all that kind of stuff, but the A9 is completely different. They have a completely different kind of stack sensor design that allows super fast readouts from that sensor. So you will not see that on the A9, and especially the A9 II, because they've upgraded the processor a little bit on this as well. So you're going to see much better on that. So
now as well, we have blackout free shooting, which is incredible. That I love as a wedding photographer. I love that I can shoot and not worry about that blackout. We also have silent shooting, and obviously because there's no physical moving parts inside, you have no shutter mechanism, there's no wear and tear on that. That's a massive, massive thing to people.
Yeah, it's huge being able to shoot electronic shutter and overall, and now you can do it at 20 frames per second on this camera, so that's always good. Now, when you do need to shoot mechanical shutter, they've upgraded it from 5 frames per second to 10. It is an upgrade. It's still not the fastest of a lot of cameras out there, and
but it's still very, very, very fast.
It is still very fast. So probably you're going to be good with that, especially because you can always shoot electronic shutter if you do need faster. But that's the only potential downside to that.
Yeah. Sony does actually brag, though, about their anti-flicker shooting, which does help with banding. And given it does create less banding, I know you always say that it's not the best on the market, but it's still really, really great an upgrade in this new A9 II.
Yeah, so they do have other cameras do have that in technology, but it is there in the Sonys. And also their shutter is rated to 500,000 actuations, which is what you would expect from a top-end camera. So even the shutter mechanism, which is actually improved a little bit in this camera, is comparable to what other high-end cameras would be.
Absolutely. So now typically to clear the buffer, it does take a while. I know with shooting at high frame rates, you do get that bit of a buffer, and it's hard and it doesn't clear as fast, but you know, with the UHS 2 slots, it is improving, and I give Sony kudos for that. And it's obviously it's needed for the consumer that's consuming this camera. It's extremely important.
Yeah, so if you do have a pretty good buffer, so it can take 239 images before filling it up.
Yeah.
But what we have noticed is that it does take a long time, for whatever reason, on these Sonys to clear that buffer. So yeah, again, should be a little bit better with UHS-2 if you're shooting RAW to both. But with that, you might not shoot 10 seconds straight of just holding down the button. But if you shoot 3 seconds at 20 frames per second, another 3 seconds, another 3 seconds, eventually you will reach that buffer if it hasn't cleared yet. So that's when those clearing speeds matter so much.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's go into autofocus. Now, obviously, Sony is the leading innovator in autofocus systems. Yes. It's unbeatable at this point. We've tried many different cameras. We were just in Iceland, and we have used many different cameras, and obviously it is the best on the market. Now, it is interesting because obviously they did do the firmware updates to the Sony A7R IV, the Sony A7 III, and the first Sony A9.
Right.
So, I mean, again, it's still the most intelligent autofocus system, and what we're, trying to get to is that the Sony A9 II is a great upgrade for this.
Right, so you have 693 autofocus points taking up 93% of that frame. And it's essentially the same autofocus system with some tweaks to the algorithm, but if you have never shot with this camera, especially with these upgrades, it is just insane. The tracking and intelligence is just out of this world compared to anything else. And then being able to track your subject as soon as it enters the frame on one side to as soon as it leaves the frame on the other is just something you cannot get with a normal DSLR. So we'll see how it pans up in reality, whether it's actually hitting those focus points. But when it comes to the technology behind it, Sony is definitely leading the way. And while this is pretty much the same, some little tweaks and getting all those updates that we just saw with the firmware. Right. So the A9 was almost like a new camera already in autofocus. So I do think that this is going to feel like a big upgrade for people who have not shot with that new firmware from the A9.
Oh, absolutely. But, so let's talk about the upgrades, the actual upgrades in this camera. We have touch to focus as the A7R IV that they just put in. It's not the greatest of all cameras, but it is a massive upgrade given from the first A9. We also have a cool thing now. We can do voice memos for better communication. If you are a sports photographer and you are sending your pictures back to another person, you want to be able to speak to them to kind of tell them what these pictures are so that they can kind of better organize the images. I think that's a pretty cool upgrade. And even if your camera's off, it's in your backpack, you can transfer images now to your phone. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, those Wi-Fi upgrades are going to come in handy if you're doing wireless tethering. A lot of upgrades on there. FTP transfer stuff is new on this.
Yeah.
A lot of kind of folder structures and things that you can do with it. Also, the new shutter is much more vibration resistant. So if you are using mechanical shutter, you're going to notice some upgrades there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so image quality. Let's talk about image quality. That is definitely huge. And we do know that the A9 is not necessarily the leading innovator in image quality, but I always argue, Dan, and I say that they put it into the Sony A7R IV. So if you are a portrait shooter, I do recommend the A7R IV. You have 61 megapixels, which is incredible. With this camera, you are getting 24 megapixels.
Right, so we didn't see a sensor upgrade. And usually that is kind of the driving reason for an upgrade of these cameras. So it is kind of surprising from that standpoint. So if you buy this camera, the A9 II, just know you're going to be using a sensor from 2017. I mean, we've kind of dissed some other brands for using their old sensor in a couple different camera models. This is kind of that same thing too, where we're using that same one. And then also, it was never really the best quality sensor. It always prioritized the speed with being that stacked CMOS design. Sony's other cameras use backside illuminated technology, and that allows them to get a little bit better performance when it comes to image quality. So kind of unfortunate not seeing an upgrade.
Sure,
I mean,
it's a technology thing.
Yeah.
And you can't have, you can't have your cake and eat it too. I think that they've done a really, really good job with the Sony A9 II, even the first Sony A9. Yeah. And the A7R IV is just a completely different camera system. Yep. So you have to think of it as that. It's just different technology. Okay, so video. that is your thing. This is his thing. He loves video. So what's going on with video?
So not a whole lot, unfortunately. So this is basically the same camera when it comes to video as we were doing before. You're going to get a little bit of upgrades from that R4 with the touch autofocus type thing. You're getting eye autofocus in video, which actually I think was with the upgraded firmware for the original A9. So
it was.
So not a whole lot new here. You are getting a 6K readout, which is being oversampled to 4K. So that's very good. And you're getting video up to 120 frames per second. However, when you're talking about the speed and readouts of these, I kind of hoped we might have seen some different frame rate options and things like that. There were definitely some rumors going around. So not a whole lot when it comes to video like that.
Yeah, and true, we did ask if there is a Slug. Sony has decided not to put it in this system, which I know is a big deal for you.
So if you're someone, I personally don't use it, but if you're someone who is shooting with 2 camera systems, being able to match the footage by shooting log could be really important. And it's just something that, for whatever reason, we're not seeing here, and we are seeing it on a lot of cheaper models.
Sure, absolutely. Now, there are massive upgrades with this camera. You know, you do have some great things going on, but there are some misses, and there are some things we wish we would have seen. So what do you think?
So the Touch AF, while it is new to this camera, has never been my favorite. Even on the A6600, which we put out a video on the R4, all of those cameras have it, but the implementation of it has just never been quite as good as some of the other cameras around. So it's one of those things that I just think could be better. And the touchscreen in general is just a little bit behind what everyone else is doing, despite, I mean, Sony's a cell phone manufacturer too. They make unbelievable screens. This one is just a little bit smaller than the competition. It's a little bit less resolution. It just doesn't look as good. And the touch implementation still only works with autofocus. So like no menu control, nothing else. So there's just some things on that one.
Yeah, I think eventually they will upgrade it, but I would definitely love to see better use of that because I use that on other camera systems all the time. It is extremely important to me. Now, there are menu systems as well. We know that Sony cameras are extremely complicated when it comes to menu systems, and customization is good with that, so you don't have to go flipping through the menu constantly, but it's just extremely complicated. And I think that, you know, the less complicated they make it, the more it will be appealing to people who are simple shooters. Now, a good thing is that they do have camera settings on here. So you can save your camera settings to each system. So you can't necessarily transfer it to between systems, but the A9 II allows you, so let's say you're passing it off to somebody else, they can just go in the menu system, quickly change it to what they like in their customization. I think that's brilliant. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, so it's things that help out. We've seen that on other cameras, but it's great to see here, and it can help out a lot when you're at these events and shooting with multiple cameras, and you might be renting them on the spot and trading them out really quick. So you can pull open your settings really quickly. Also, there's no increase in technology in image quality, which again, we're seeing some new cameras from Nikon and Canon coming out this year. Probably, well, Nikon's kind of announced that they're releasing a new D5 upgrade. So we're going to see that. We might see some better image quality here, and we're not seeing it from Sony in this one.
And this is where we agree to disagree as well. You know, I say just you use 2 different camera systems. If you're looking for image quality, grab the A7R4 versus the A9. The A9 is just going to give you unbelievable frame rates. And it's just 2 different things. It's 2 different technologies, and that's important to remember. Now, personal wish list. What do you want?
Yeah, there were a bunch of things that I was hoping that Sony would do that's not on this. Apart from those misses, I would say that the IBIS technology on here is good, but it's not great. There are other cameras that are doing better with it. I would love to see, especially with that faster processor, I would love to see the A9 leading the charge in some of these areas of improving them first and then seeing them kind of roll out to their less expensive bodies. So we're not seeing any improvements in that one. And then video, obviously, we didn't see anything like 4K 60, higher frame rates. You can shoot 4K 60 on 1DXs and things like that. So no big upgrades there. And then, yeah, there's just a couple little things there that I think could be better.
Yeah, the touchscreen as well. I mean, he just talked about it a little bit, but the touchscreen could definitely be upgraded. Again, I'm always using my touchscreen. I shoot with the EOS R a ton lately, and I I am just constantly using live view, and I am, touch to focus all the time, even as I'm looking through the viewfinder. That's just how I shoot, and that's just personal preference. You can shoot however you'd like. Now,
I would love to see them redo the body, especially for an A9 series. I'd love to see something a little bit beefier, easier to operate with gloves on, things like that. And possibly even a dual battery system. It doesn't have to be 1DX size or anything like that, but I'd love to see a little bit more focus on ergonomics rather than stick to this design and just try and tweak some things here and there.
We agree to disagree on that. He was just in Iceland. Well, we were in Iceland, so him using things with gloves is now very important.
It is. I used it a lot. So those are kind of our thoughts on this new camera. Let us know what you think. Yeah. Actually, so the price and release date for this?
Yeah, so it's going to be released in November. It's going to be shipping in November, actually. And the price in the U.S. is $4,500, which is an awesome price because the rumors were different.
Yeah, it was rumored to be about $5,000, and $4,500 is pretty good.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Really only about $500 more than you can get the A7R or for the A9 first generation right now. It's way cheaper than like a old model 1DX or a D5. So it's pretty reasonable on the price. So I'll give them some of the slack on some of the other things.
And it is $6,000 in Canadian as well. We want to mention that. I think that's a great price point, and I think they did a very good job with the upgrades.
Absolutely.
And I also love the ergonomics.
Okay,
We're just going to have to agree to disagree.
Yeah.
Anyways, thank you guys for watching. Again, leave comments and questions down below. Let us know what you guys think about this. What do you guys think about the upgrades,
or the ergonomics?
Whatever. Thank you guys so much for watching.